wake up, you slept. Nothing terrible happened yesterday, and yet you feel mentally exhausted, not sad, not depressed, just drained. You try to focus, but your brain feels like there are too many tabs open, messages, notifications, information, noise, constant noise. And the strange part is, your life might actually be fine. No crisis, no catastrophe. But your mind still feels like it's running at 120% capacity. So you start asking yourself, am I burned out? But what if that's not the real problem? What if you're not burned out at all? What if your brain is simply overstimulated? So if you've been feeling like this lately, like your mind is constantly tired, you're not imagining it. Something actually changed, not just in your life, but in the environment your brain now lives in. A few years ago, your mind had space. Space to think, space to focus, space to be bored, and boredom used to be normal. But today, your brain is almost never allowed to rest. From the moment you wake up, your attention is already under attack. Notifications, messages, videos, endless scrolling. New information every few seconds, and none of it feels dangerous, it feels normal. But the human brain was never designed to process this much stimulation all the time. So what happens? Your brain doesn't shut down. It adapts. It starts operating in a permanent state of overload. And that overload slowly destroys one thing: your ability to focus. Your brain was never designed for constant stimulation. For most of human history, your mind experienced long periods of quiet, moments where nothing happened, moments where you could actually think. But today, your brain almost never experiences silence. There is always something new. Another message, another video, another piece of information demanding attention, and every time you switch your attention, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that tells your brain, "This is interesting, pay attention." The problem is, when your brain receives too many dopamine spikes, it starts adapting. What used to feel stimulating now feels normal. So your brain begins craving more stimulation, more noise, more scrolling, more novelty. And slowly, the simple act of focusing on one thing starts to feel almost impossible. Here's the strange part. Most people think their brain feels exhausted because they're doing too much. But in reality, your brain often feels exhausted because it's switching too much. Every time your attention jumps from one thing to another, your brain has to reset. Close one mental tab, open another, close that one, open something new. And this constant switching is extremely expensive for the brain. Even if each action feels small, the mental cost adds up. After hours of switching attention between messages, videos, notifications, and endless scrolling, your brain enters a state of cognitive fatigue. So when you finally try to focus on something important, your brain simply doesn't have the energy left. Not because you're lazy, but because your attention has already been spent everywhere else. So when people feel mentally exhausted, they usually try the obvious solution. They try to rest, they sleep more, they take a break, they spend a day doing nothing. But here's the strange part. Even after resting, their mind still feels tired. And that's confusing because rest normally solves fatigue. But overstimulation works differently. Your brain isn't tired because it worked too hard. Your brain is tired because it never stopped receiving input. Imagine trying to relax while someone keeps tapping your shoulder every few seconds. Even if the tap is small, it still prevents your mind from settling. That's exactly what constant digital stimulation does. Your brain never reaches a real state of mental quiet. So instead of recovering, your attention system stays in a permanent state of low-level stress. And there's another reason this problem keeps getting worse. Your attention has become one of the most valuable resources in the world. Every app, every platform, every piece of content is competing for one thing: your focus. Because the longer they keep your attention, the more money they make. So everything you see online is carefully designed to keep your brain engaged. Endless scrolling, short videos, notifications, recommendations. Each one is engineered to trigger curiosity. to make your brain think, just one more. But when this happens hundreds of times per day as your attention system never resets, and slowly, without noticing, you lose the ability to stay focused on one thing for a long time. So if overstimulation is the problem, the solution isn't simply working harder, and it isn't forcing discipline either, because discipline becomes extremely difficult when your brain is constantly overloaded. Instead, the first step is learning how to reduce stimulation. Not completely. That's impossible in the modern world. But intentionally. Your brain needs moments where nothing is competing for your attention. No notifications, no scrolling, no constant switching between tasks. Even short periods of quiet can begin resetting your attention system. Moments where your brain is allowed to focus on just one thing. Reading, writing, thinking, or simply sitting without new input. At first, this will feel uncomfortable because your brain has become used to constant stimulation, but slowly your attention starts rebuilding itself, and focusing becomes easier again. One of the simplest ways to rebuild your focus is something that feels almost unnatural today. Silence. Not silence as in sleeping, but silence from stimulation. Moments where your brain is not consuming anything new. No scrolling, no notifications, no background videos. Just space. Space for your mind to process what it already received. When you give your brain these moments of quiet, something interesting starts happening. Your attention begins slowing down. Instead of jumping from one thing to another, your mind starts settling, and slowly the ability to stay with one thought for longer periods comes back. Not because you forced discipline, but because your brain finally had the chance to recover. The strange thing about overstimulation is that most people don't even realize it's happening. They just assume something is wrong with them. They think they became lazy, unmotivated, undisciplined. But in reality, their brain has simply been overloaded for too long. Too much information, too many inputs, too many things competing for the same attention. And when your mind never gets space to slow down, even simple tasks start feeling difficult. So the problem isn't that you lost discipline. The problem is that your attention has been fragmented for years. And once you see this clearly, you stop blaming yourself. You start understanding that rebuilding focus is not about pushing harder. It's about removing noise. But once you start noticing it, you begin to see the pattern everywhere. People trying to focus while their phone lights up every few seconds, trying to read while another video starts playing, trying to think while new information keeps arriving. And slowly you realize something important. The modern world isn't designed to protect your attention. It's designed to consume it. So rebuilding focus isn't just a personal habit. It's a conscious decision to step away from constant stimulation. In a world where everything is fighting for your attention, focus becomes a rare ability. Not because people became weaker, but because their attention is constantly being divided. Notifications, endless content, constant stimulation, all competing for the same limited resource, your mind. So if your focus feels weaker today, it might not be a personal failure. It might simply be the result of living in an environment that never stops stimulating your brain. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't adding more discipline. It's protecting your attention. Because in the end, your attention is your life. Where you place it is where your life goes.